This is this famous Malthusian trap. So having evolved in such a world, this is really where we get our instincts, why we can be so brutal and so evil, and death seems easy for us. We're suckers for war and taking out the bad guys, and so much more. If we had evolved in a world where you could just wish for whatever you wanted and it became true, then there would have been no need for natural selection and evolution to shape genetics for violence and conflict and that us versus them mentality that so easily leads to racism and so many other social evils. Now, the modern social order is different because it is not a zero-sum world. The economic pie in the modern social order grows constantly because human beings are always transforming natural resources, cubic miles of natural resources, into greater and greater quantities of wealth. We do not depend on nature to slowly replenish wealth. We transform all these quantities of matter into greater and greater quantities of wealth on our own. So because of this, we have because of these two major reasons, and I'm sure there's many others, again, we have this propensity to believe that the social order needs some kind of visible entity managing it, and that's why we get all excited about our politicians, and we care greatly about their personal traits. Are they trustworthy? Do they have courage? Are they smart? And so on. But in reality, the traits of individuals are nowhere near as important these days as the economic system that really creates prosperity. For example, you could have been the nicest, the hardest working, the smartest person, but if you were in a communist created famine, you might have been forced into cannibalizing your children, as happened in China and Russia and at other times throughout the history of communism. While an American here in the United States, he might have been selfish, maybe not really care that much about others, but because he was in a smoothly running economy, he would have enjoyed a much better life. So again, we could say that intuitively we have not evolved to really understand the impersonal economic forces that shape our modern social orders, and we have this propensity to believe that it's individuals that really make a difference. And so we also tend to look at the economic pie as like a big banana tree, where the more people, the less bananas, and we think that the solution to every problem is to take bananas from the haves to give to the have less. Oh, we're concerned because not enough people can afford medical care. No problem. There's plenty of rich folks that have plenty of bananas that they don't seem to be using, and we could take their bananas to feed this gigantic public healthcare bureaucracy and give everyone free healthcare. So we tend to fall for these very obvious and simple ideas that are disastrous for the modern social order. In reality, we'd be much better off if we just let everyone keep all their money and not create these bureaucracies or these transfers of wealth. But again, without an understanding of economics, our intuition leads us to believe that those are the good answers. And again, that is why we want to understand economics. Once one understands economics, we no longer fall for those ideas, and we see how individual economic freedom and little government leads to a prosperous social order as opposed to chaos and great injustices. Now, I want to say a few things about reason number 3, which is why it is that our mainstream economics establishment can be so wrong as well. But actually, before mentioning this, I want to say that if one just looks at the history of mankind, there have been great ideological shifts in a very short amount of time. Just a few generations ago, the idea that men and women had the same rights under the law would have seemed absurd, like a recipe for chaos. And the same thing applies to slavery. The idea that you could enslave someone of a different race, or even your own race, was very common until very recently. I mean, the Roman Empire was largely built on slavery, and it happened just an eye blink in terms of evolutionary time. And again, for most of our evolution, human beings have been enslaving people who were of the same race, because we couldn't even travel far enough to find someone that looked slightly different to consider them a different race. So humanity has gone through many gigantic ideological shifts, and I am one of the many libertarians and just people who are part of this wrongful revolution who feel like we are in the middle of another gigantic ideological shift, that it's just a matter of time before some of these very simple economic concepts can spread through millions of minds and really turn around this big tide of having so much government manage society, and really put an end to this big government socialist ideology. Just nip it in the bud finally. So why is it that our mainstream economics establishment can be so wrong? As horrible as the history of socialism and communism was during the 20th century, we can learn a very important lesson from it. Socialism and communism, this idea that the government can manage society better, that we should have more equality, share the wealth, and this type of socialist communist ideology, it spread through the minds of millions of individuals because they really believed in it. There were a lot of smart people who felt like this was better than having so much freedom, which people felt like it would inevitably end up with this capitalist evil system where the rich are exploiting the poor, where we have all kinds of injustices. So it appealed, one could say that it appealed to mainstream individuals in many countries. And it's important to realize that, because we have to open up our minds to the possibility that our experts and economic establishment can be wrong. Now, our economics establishment is not as wrong as the Russian and the Chinese establishment that brought about communism. Nobody's just putting a gun to us and sending us to some gulag where you work in a concentration camp till you die. But our establishment is still far from preaching the right economic ideas. So next, I want to briefly quote, because I want to take some stabs at our mainstream economics establishment, because in order to get anyone to open up their minds to try to learn economics and put doubts in their minds as to why it is that our economic establishment is wrong, I mean, one has to make a dent in that and open up someone's mind, because if not, people think to themselves, oh my God, why am I going to put any effort in learning economics when obviously we have all these experts. We have hundreds of university departments with thousands of people who have PhDs in economics, and all of these people feel like we need the Federal Reserve and that going back to the gold standard would plunge us back into antiquity. So I want to say a few things about, for example, William E. Simon, the former Secretary of the Treasury for Presidents Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, in his wonderful book, A Time for Truth, he mentioned the following with respect to the incompetence of our mainstream economic establishment during the financial crisis of the 1970s. He says the following: the Wall Street Journal interviewed several dozen of the most prominent economists in the United States on the causes of the recession and on ways to prevent a recurrence. They disagreed about virtually everything save this, that there was much economists did not yet understand. The details of the economists' ignorance are of interest, but I stress here the overriding conclusion to be drawn from their statements. The economists who have been advising our presidents simply had not known what they were doing. He continues a little further down. Gerson Green, formerly of the Office of Economic Opportunity, summed up the attitude of many of his colleagues when he observed caustically, the change I discern is that none of us knows what to do. In those days, we thought we did. The country has taught the social engineers a lesson. So who was running the store? The answer is nobody. Not one human being in the whole vast realm of political control over the American economy has ever known what he was doing. For 40 years, the American ship of state has been lunging erratically toward economic disaster, with no awareness of its direction. So next, another, I think, powerful little soundbite comes from Ben Bernanke, the chairman of our Federal Reserve, where he admits that the Great Depression was largely caused by the Federal Reserve itself. He says the following: let me end my talk by abusing slightly my status as an official representative of the Federal Reserve. I would like to say to Milton and Anna, regarding the Great Depression, you're right, we did it. We're very sorry, but thanks to you, we won't do it again. And my last little soundbite here comes from this wonderful book, The Joy of Freedom, An Economist's Odyssey by economist David R. Henderson. In page 193, he mentions a conversation that took place between Nixon and some of his economic advisors during this great financial crisis during the 70s. Nixon: Herb, inflation is getting higher again. What should we do? Herb Stein, who happens to be the father of Ben Stein: let me ask our new member, Marina. Marina, what should we do? Marina: impose price controls. Nixon: but we already have price controls. Marina: then abolish price controls. So you see, I mean, our establishment, I don't want to say that they don't have a clue, but due to various, for a lot of them really, they don't have the right understanding of economics. Now there's many of them who do feel like a lot of what the government does is wrong, but because of various political pressures and maybe they feel like they can't really make that much of a difference anyways, they just kind of go along with the ideology of the times. But so hopefully, having mentioned these things, one puts enough doubts or opens up someone's mind enough to consider learning more about economics.